The following was originally written and recorded in late 2019 under the name of Gwen and Peter's Aged Awareness. Nothing that has happened since has changed my mind about anything contained in it. Originally it went out as episodes 1 and 2, but since each of these were less than half the length of the subsequent episodes, I decided to treat them as one continuous episode of the present series. Both parts originally followed a quotation from one or other of Duane Heppner's wonderful book series Amazing Romantic Adventures. Required reading, in my view, for anyone interested in escaping this physical plane and the dire things that are rapidly approaching us, which anyone with only half an eye must surely now see. By word of explanation to Part 1, in his book, Duane has just described to us how he was shown by a guide that the great composer, generally agreed to be the greatest master of the Romantic period in music, Richard Wagner, had been visited by the UNUversal guides and worked with them, as a result of which the whole development of music, and indeed the orchestra, took a huge leap forward. Indeed, it appears that Wagner is up in the real universe, continuing to work on and perform wonderful new music. Part 1. I have to say I find this incredibly interesting. The wonderful music of Wagner has played a huge part in this life, and I am certain not just this one. There is no doubt that his mighty work, the 15-hour epic Der Ring des Nibelungen, the Ring of the Nibelung in particular, has already enslaved my being long before it did in my present life on earth. When I rediscovered it as a teenager, for rediscovery is certainly the correct word, what should have been new wasn't. It is no exaggeration to say I found it totally haunting. I knew I had heard it before, but certainly not in this lifetime. I was brought up on Elvis Presley and Bill Haley. Throughout all Wagner's music dramas, the word opera is simply not adequate to describe these vast symphonies with words. I found small, seemingly insignificant passages, often merely a few notes, that I seemed to know and pointed back to some earlier time. Indeed, I came to think of them as pointers. They seldom occurred in any famous musical passages, but more in the very heart of those mighty scores that I could not possibly have heard by accident or otherwise on the radio or whatever. In any case, the sheer number of them, especially in the Ring, precluded that possibility. I also knew in my very being I had not only heard them but seen them before, and had a vivid deja vu experience at one point that seemed to prove this. Wagner therefore played a large part in my voyage of self-discovery over some 60 years or more that ultimately led me to Duane Heppner's fascinating books and the NUUU. The fact that the composer himself was evidently visited by the real guides and obviously granted an insight into the real worlds, including what can only be termed the real music, gives a fascinating answer to a previously unanswered question posed in a book I read years ago, namely, what happened to Wagner between completing Lohengrin and starting to write The Ring? As the question implies, musically there is a huge quantum leap between the two works. Lohengrin was completed in 1848, and although a wonderful work, already full of beautiful and much-loved music, by the time Wagner started the score of Das Rheingold, the Rheingold, the first of the 4 Ring dramas in 1853, the music had become totally supercharged, vividly descriptive of the natural world in which the mythological events are set, and often almost agonizingly beautiful. The 5-year interval was spent by Wagner writing the words to the 4 dramas, something no other great opera composer has ever done, but it seems now self-evident that it was during that time that the real guides manifested themselves, perhaps also during the long periods of meditation Wagner tells us in his autobiography, when he composed the music locked away in a silent room draped with pastel colours and exuding beautiful perfumes. As he said, "Nothing new comes to me at the piano. It is then a simple working out." In fact, he tells us that even while writing the words, he had what he called the musical aroma in his head. He also leaves us a fascinating insight into how the music came to him for the opening of the ring. He had gone to a spa town to take the waters when one day, sitting on a bench, he suddenly found himself in a waking dream with what was to become the swirling waters of the Rhine at the beginning of Das Rheingold. He came round in terror, thinking he was drowning. He then realised, he said, that the music was not going to come to him from without, but from within. In other words, he was what would probably nowadays be described as channeling the music. Where else could that be from but the higher realms on the real side? Whereas all his mature works, from Der Fliegende Holländer, The Flying Dutchman, onwards, exhibit much that is esoteric, even in his only comedy, Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, The Master Singers of Nuremberg, it is interesting that the prize song comes to Walter von Stolzing, the hero, in a dream. It reaches new heights in his final work, Parsifal. Not only the music, which at times is so suggestive of unseen, higher realms, but the story itself could almost be likened to the search to return to whence we came long ago, the source of everything, or the all is, as Duane calls it. In my view, the all is could be symbolised here by the Holy Grail. In Wagner's wonderful story, which he drew from Arthurian legends, Parsifal, Percival in the English, is a young lad who has grown up in the woods after straying from his home with his widowed mother, Herzeleida, Heart in Sorrow, who subsequently dies of grief at her loss. In Act 1 he appears in the grounds of Montsalvat, a castle where is kept the Holy Grail. Having been made to witness a ceremony which he doesn't understand, he is unceremoniously ejected and sent packing at the end of the act. Arguably, this is the beginning of the quest, and can be likened to a new soul leaving the all is on a voyage of discovery that we all go through. In Act 2, he eventually finds himself confronted by the castle of the Black Magician and former guardian of the Grail, Klingsor. Before he comes face to face with Klingsor, however, he has to battle his way through many of the latter's knights, and then escape the clutches of the seductive flower maidens, and finally the attempted seduction of Kundry, the wild woman, who has already been the downfall of many of the Grail Knights, including Amfortas, the present Grail King. All of this could be likened to fighting his way through many lifetimes, with all their trials and temptations. After failing in her attempts to seduce Parsifal, Kundry calls on Klingsor, who then appears, wielding the Holy Spear. This is a spear that was used by the Roman Longinus to pierce Christ's side when he was on the cross. Like the Grail, it is a treasured holy relic, and was stolen from Amfortas by Klingsor while Amfortas was laying with Kundry. Before making off with it, Klingsor had plunged the spear into Amfortas, leaving him with a wound that can never be healed except by contact with the spear itself once more. It is Klingsor's ambition to obtain also the Grail and use its power for his own nefarious ends. In my view, Klingsor could be likened to the Kaluam god, ruler of the third level of existence, and Kundry in some ways suggests the influence, Kaluam's seductive cohort. In fact, we have already learned that Kundry is a reincarnation of Herodias, the wife of King Herod, and that she laughed at Christ on the cross. We are told he looked down at her, and since that time she has spent many horrendous lifetimes desperately trying to find him again, to seek forgiveness and release from her curse. She has been described as the most psychologically complex character in the whole operatic repertoire. Either way, Klingsor now hurls the spear at Parsifal, who catches it in mid-air and makes the sign of the cross. Instantly, Klingsor's castle and the magic gardens, abode of the flower maidens, are reduced to dust. Only Kundry now remains, and she puts a curse on Parsifal, saying he will never find his way back to Monsalvat and the Grail. When Act 3 begins, many years have passed, when Parsifal finally appears once more at Monsalvat. We learn that he has gone through many battles, carefully avoiding using the Holy Spear, which he now carries with him, and only now, as a mature man, found his way back. In other words, after getting past the Kaloum god, and after many more existences, he has finally rejoined the All Is. Part 2. Few people can now be unaware of the chemtrails crisscrossing our skies and not heard of the poisonous filth that they are unloading on us, but we do nothing. Can people really be so thick as to not realise there is something wrong with our food, when allergies amongst children are skyrocketing, as are the chances of getting cancer, now 1 in 2, whereas not so long ago it was 1 in 3, an alarmingly enough rate in itself, but we do nothing. In addition, we are told authorities are concerned about the apparently inexplicable surging numbers of cases of leukemia and other cancers in people under 40. Just walk down the high street and count the number of people, young and old, who have a mobile phone glued to one ear. They may not know it, but they should by now, that they are literally microwaving their brains. The phone and the kitchen appliance work on exactly the same frequency. But we do nothing. And with the advent of 5G, the destruction, for that is what it is, of the human race through radiation is assured, and we still do nothing. No person, no government, or indeed succession of governments could be that stupid or negligent to allow the people of the world to be slowly but surely exterminated by policies that ensure the poisoning of our water, our food, and the very air we breathe, and for good measure by over-the-top radiation. That being the case, there is only one other explanation. It's deliberate. What is equally clear is that it has all been allowed to progress so far that it has got to the stage when there is very little we can now do about it. We live in an increasingly less subtle police state, with cameras breathing down our necks practically wherever we go, and fierce penalties for stepping out of line from an increasingly absurd legal system. The mainstream media is all in the hands of the seemingly favoured few, and the only way at present of communicating or receiving the truth, other than by word of mouth, is the internet. And this is clearly slowly being closed down. Even without this control, how could the seemingly inevitable be stopped, let alone reversed? Physical insurrection or revolution simply replaces one dysfunctional system with another. Besides, any such solution would be targeted at the wrong controllers. The plain fact is, our so-called world leaders are merely puppets, doing the bidding of their much more sinister and hidden masters, and kept in their place by their own greed and the trappings of illusory power, and in many cases by blackmail, probably in some cases also mind control. There is in fact little hope of even approaching the real puppet masters. It is clear we have only 2 options. Firstly, to accept the situation, and to expect to return to a very bleak world indeed, after having shed this present mortal coil when the time comes. A world devoid of most organic life as we know it, peopled by a dwindling number of dumbed-down half-human slaves, being replaced by robot drones, whose sole function is to do the bidding of the new world order of faceless beings. Alternatively, we can turn our backs on all this and try and ensure we do not come back here. How? You may very well ask, and towards what end? The end is total freedom in a universe without any kind of restrictions and unimaginable beauty of both sound and sight. I say universe, but universes is more correct, as the further we travel, the more there is still to come, as we eventually find our way back to the source of everything, the all is, from whence we each once emerged, to be sent out to undergo endless experiences over countless existences in the lower levels. The how is of course the tricky part, but the very fact that you have taken the trouble to listen to this discourse shows you are already at a level when you are open to all this, and may indeed already be totally aware, in which case I apologise for trying to teach my grandmother to suck eggs. In my own case, I have only relatively recently been directed clearly by the hidden guides, who I know have looked after me and got me through countless crises, and as a young man, the darkest of dark nights of the soul, throughout this life, to Duane Heppner and his wonderful books and presentation of the NUUU. I know it has been a long trek indeed, over countless lifetimes, some of which I have been shown, and some of these were terrible indeed, to get to where I am now. If I have learned one thing, it is that it is imperative to learn to forgive oneself for all the mistakes and misdeeds in this or previous lives, before we can hope to move on in the realization that everything is necessary experience that we have to go through, and that the seeming opposites of good and evil are in fact simply earthly concepts and ultimately of no consequence. In order to move on, it is first necessary to effectively attract the attention of the real universal guides, those far advanced emissaries of the all is, and convince them of your sincerity of intention to rise above the levels collectively known as creation, and work your passage on to the real universes. Seemingly, the best and probably quickest way of doing this is to sing or say the NUUU, whether vocally or in your head, as many times a day as is practicable, but especially just before going to sleep and on awakening. As a result of this, you will very soon find you are remembering more of your dreams, and that many of these are clearly symbolic of many different things, to give you real guidance and instructions. Once this starts to happen, you will feel the need to seek out an aware person or persons to help you interpret them. In this respect, my wife Gwen, my younger son Kevin and myself have been very fortunate in having access to Duane by Skype on a regular basis. It goes without saying that to hope to progress you must cultivate a personality that is able to shun all the material and other trappings of the earthly lives we are so entrenched in, and to do your best to help others in this and every way. The bywords here are sincerity, humility, gratitude and purity. All very easy to say for most people, so very hard to do. But when you consider the alternatives, it really is a no-brainer. What is there to lose in at least trying? There is an infinite number of universes to gain.